My name is Upkar Lidder. I work for IBM. I'm out of the Bay Area, and I'm part of the developer advocacy team. So my job is to do hackathons, meetups, webinars on topics like this. I also focus on our Watson services, which is a lot of AI, NLP, chatbots, visual recognition, things like that. But today we're talking about introduction to serverless computing. And my question to you guys is if you can just shout out what comes to mind when you think of serverless.
No server.
No server.
Saving money.
Right answer. No server. Saving money. Who said that?
Client-based applications.
Client-based applications.
As in an application that runs this offline.
Application that runs off. That's interesting. What else? Anybody? So first of all, it does not mean no servers, although the name suggests that. One of my things on Twitter I said was, and a couple of people replied, I said, we should not call it serverless, we should call it less server, because that's what it is. It is not that you're getting rid of servers. And then I came across this, it's a little bit long, but I tried to highlight the main points I wanted to convey. This is from a white paper, it's on GitHub, really interesting. But the highlight here is, serverless, you do not require server management. So there are still servers in the backend, but it's somebody else's problem. Your application is bundled as one or more functions, and then each one of these things, so execution, scaling, billing, capacity planning, all of that is done by somebody else. So the idea is, as developers, you focus on writing your code, and the DevOps and all of that is handed off to somebody else. So next couple of slides, we'll go over sort of the history, and then in what use cases or what situations serverless is could be a viable option. And then we'll look at, I'll do a little bit of demo, and then we'll look at what are the challenges with serverless. So it's pretty simple. Back in the day, I remember when I started with IBM, we made this. We used to have a foosball table. And fun fact, I was up in Canada, and the foosball champion was out of my office. It's pretty cool. But anyways, we made this server to track all of our scores and built like a nice front end to just to show off who's got most games. And that was literally, it was like a box sitting under my desk, right? So that's where the sort of bare metal. And then of course, you can still do this on a lot of clouds, is get a virtual machine and handle all of that yourself. From there we go on to containers, Dockers, Kubernetes, and finally, another abstract layer on top of that is functions, where you don't even have to worry about provisioning a Docker container. Another way of looking at it is like this. So you have your not the infrastructure part, but your application itself. Most of us, or the smaller apps, maybe start off with a single monolithic app. It's not a bad thing. If that's what you do that. I think the important bit is getting to market and getting your product out there. So if that's how you know how to do it, do it. But then you start running into problems where if you have multiple people in your team, it's hard to manage that app, right? And so you start breaking down your app into multiple services. Maybe different people or different teams work on one service at a time. It's easy to manage that way. And then you start thinking about, okay, how about maybe certain parts of your application are used more than others, or maybe certain parts are more critical to your business than others, and how do you make those parts, or all of your services, highly available, right? And then you start thinking about, again, you go from high availability to maybe regional aspects. So how do you bundle it up for different regions? And I guess the gist here is, all of this is provided with serverless, right? So the far right, where you have the high availability, the scalability with different regions, is provided by all of the serverless platforms. So again, to summarize, serverless deployment, the VM, the provisioning of your servers, management, not your problem, and you focus on code. More importantly, a lot of serverless compute engines do this, and they're mostly based on event programming models. So the idea is you want to decouple all of your functions from not only each other, but also your other code, right? And one way to do that is to use event-based programming. And I'll show you examples of what that looks like. So a couple of use cases where this may be important. The first one is if you're a game developer shop. In that case, this is pretty normal. When the game is released, there's a high peak of usage, and then it goes down over time. So in this case, you know that it's going to go down over time, but you don't know how high it's going to go initially. A good example is Fortnite, right? That one just blew up. And even now, like when they come up with new releases, they still follow the cycle where it goes up substantially and goes down. And the question to ask is like how, if this was if you're managing all of this yourself, which they probably do, but the way to think about this is like, why are you paying for that high usage all across this time on the x-axis when you only need when you only need the high availability or the maximum usage in the first 5 months. So this is similar. It's a conference app, right? So your conference, it's a weekly conference, or it's Monday to Thursday. Thursday being the last day. A lot of people come in on Monday. During the day or before you leave your hotel for the conference, there's a high peak where people are trying to see what's coming. They want to schedule their day around the different events at the conference. And then in the evening, it sort of goes down. An idea is very similar here. Like, why do you want to pay for all of these extra resources when you're only using it certain parts of the day? And then this final example is, I can totally relate to this, as every other Friday when you get your paycheck, right? That's where people log into their bank to see if the pay actually made it, and most likely it did. But it's kind of nice to see, it's nice to see the dollar amount in your bank account that it actually did. And again, like, why should the banking service or the app developer pay for that whole thing throughout the week when they know the usage is going to peak on every other Friday? So just some of the use cases. Some of the other ones here. So all of these logos are based on are from IBM products, but the idea is generic. So in this case, one of the use cases is a serverless backend where your front end has got an API that hits a function. The function is then storing something in a Cloudant database, which is our CouchDB NoSQL database. If you look at this guy here, data processing. So somebody uploads a picture into a database. Your function gets fired. It processes the image and stores it back into the database. That's another use case. Chatbots are also very, I guess chatbots are popular now, but another use case would be to have your bot deployed as a function. And then in the back end, it could talk to, or in the front end, it could talk to Alexa, or it could talk to Google Home or whatever, but the back end could be this, one piece of code that's sitting on on a function, or as a function. What else? The streaming one is interesting. So in streaming, you have a message bus or a message hub, and as soon as the message comes in on a certain queue, you fire off a function and do some processing. And of course, there's scheduled tasks. So if you want to do logging or if you want to do backups on a regular basis, you could write a function that fires every some amount of time. So for example, daily at 9 p.m. or something like that. So again, going back to use cases, typically if you have small sort of sporadic demand, small tasks, very focused tasks, but with unpredictable rise in demand, then serverless is a good use case. The other big one is stateless. Almost all of the serverless vendors, or even the solutions, are mostly stateless. So you're in charge of, between making calls to your serverless platform, you're in charge of storing, persisting that state outside of your serverless function. Okay, I have some more here. These are I'm going to skip this because we talked about most of these. Okay, and then I wanted to, I work at IBM, but I wanted to give you a general idea of the landscape. This is a couple of weeks old, so the other thing to keep in mind is it's really hard to come up with a comparison like this because this field is changing so fast on a daily basis. But last I checked, all of the major companies offer some sort of serverless compute engine. So there's Amazon Lambda. We offer, ours is called IBM Cloud Functions. There's Microsoft, and also Google has their own offering. But they're pretty similar in what they can do. But there's always some catching up to do, or a certain company may be better off at doing one thing but generally they all sort of follow these principles. Okay, so today for the demo purpose and to make the concepts more concrete, we will look at Apache Openwhisk. So this is an open source software developed by IBM, Adobe, Red Hat a couple of years ago, and then donated to Apache. And here are the different concepts that I guess you need to understand to work with Openwhisk. So the big one here is actions. And actions is your actual function. That's the code that's running as a function on cloud. And then you have triggers. And that's what we were looking at before with the different use cases. So a trigger maybe something came into my NoSQL database. So that's a combination of a source and a trigger. So when something comes into my Cloudant or my NoSQL database, some trigger will be triggered, right? The other one could be somebody sends me an email. So every time I get an email, my cloud function should be triggered, and it does something. And that, of course, that's based on your business logic and rules. So again, the triggers and actions they're completely unrelated, and then you use something called rules to connect them, to connect your triggers and your actions. And then the pipeline is just showing then once the action is run, some results are stored somewhere. Okay, and then again, here are some examples of how that looks like. So you can have database changes, or maybe running an IoT system where you're getting readings of some sensors like temperature, and every time that reading comes in, you may want to do something with it, right? It could be as simple as maybe aggregating all of them and storing the results somewhere. All right, so those are my triggers of the different, when an event happens, some trigger is triggered, and then I have my rules to connect my triggers and actions, and my action is what actually I do with it. So that's my code, that's my logic. I heard Polyglot before, so most of the serverless compute engines do offer support for a variety of languages. Openwhisk out of the box offers these languages. Plus, it has the ability for you to upload a Docker container. So you can essentially then go any language you want. As long as it runs in Docker, you can upload it to an Openwhisk cloud, and IBM Cloud being one of those. Yes?
Does Openwhisk have to be used in the cloud?
I have it running locally in my system. So one way to deploy it is using Docker. So anywhere you can deploy Docker.
So like, say I had a VPS offshore, would I be able to run Openwhisk?
As long as
the environment and
as long as you're able to connect to it, you should be able to run it.
All right.
So this is sort of the architecture of Openwhisk. If you go to their site, their documentation has a lot more details, but I just want to give you a quick glance of what this looks like. So they have an Nginx HTTP server running as a proxy server right on top, so when a request comes in and goes there first, it is then forwarded to the next entity in the system, which is the controller, and controller is looking at what kind of request this is. Because you can make, one request could be, hey, give me all the actions, give me all the triggers, delete an action, delete a trigger, right? That's one sort of request. And the other one, which we are maybe more interested in, is invoke this action. So controller takes care of, or identifies a request, takes care of what kind it is, and then it goes into CouchDB, makes sure you're authorized to be able to do that action, whatever that may be. And then let's say if we are running or invoking an action, it goes back to CouchDB, gets the action off of the database, and then it passes it on to the next stage, which is sort of a load balancer. And the invokers you see here, each invoker is essentially a Docker container. So it'll start up a Docker container if one is not already running. It'll get your code from CouchDB, instantiate the container, and run your code on it. And then finally, when it comes back, it stores all the results back in CouchDB. And CouchDB also is an open source NoSQL database. So that's like very high level of how things work. There's obviously more going on under the hood here. But again, it's a completely open source project, so you can actually go look at the code and see what's going on. All right, so I'm transitioning from Apache Openwhisk into IBM Cloud Function. So again, it runs the Openwhisk. What it does is it adds, first of all, it adds a whole bunch of UI on top of it, so it's easy to manage and see it running in a website versus doing CLI. Additionally, it provides what we call packages. So there are some open source packages. So Kafka is a message bus, and then there's an action of it provides an action to be able to post to a queue on Kafka, and then there's a trigger. So when a certain topic is posted, then you can run your action, and of course it'll give you a way to create a rule to link the action and the trigger. Same thing with Git. Somebody created this. It lets you, with Git, there's a trigger for commit. So every time somebody commits something, you can run an action. And it's really open, so you can create for your system. You can create, whatever action or triggers that you need. And then up here, IBM provides a couple of our own. So IBM Cloudant is the NoSQL CouchDB system, and then the actions here are, it gives you a way to read, gives you a way to write to that database, and every time a document is changed in the database, you can run your action using this changes trigger. All right, so just to go back to the open source philosophy here, all of the hosted services on IBM are based on these open source software. So even we're talking about open source, or we're talking about Apache Openwhisk, but that is exposed as, or is built on by IBM Cloud Functions. Once you build your functions or your actions, most likely you also need then an API gateway to expose that to applications and sort of the outside world. That's built on Loopback. And then, like I said, the CouchDB is Cloudant, and then the IBM Message Hub is Apache Kafka, which is also open source. All right, let's look at how this looks. So I have my terminal running here. Let me know if the font is big enough. Is that good? Okay, so I installed Openwhisk, and it was a simple, I think it was brew install. It wasn't that hard. But I just wanted to show you, I mostly work with the IBM version of it, but I wanted to show you how easy it is to install on your system. So like you were asking if only on cloud. So this is another way to do it. You would do it on your local laptop, especially if you're a developer, you're building on your laptop, you would want to make sure it runs locally on Openwhisk, and then you would push it out off to, if you're using IBM Cloud, then you would push all of it off to IBM Cloud. But I just want to show you the different pieces here. So I just ran a Docker PS and then formatted in a certain way. I have a couple of extra ones, but essentially these are all of the Openwhisk ones. And if you see, there's a lot of these names are from the diagram I showed you before. So it's got runtimes. I've been running this earlier today, so my containers are mostly warm. But then here's the API gateway. It's got a couple of invokers, the controller, and then the message hub, right? And Zookeeper is the service manager that it uses. So let's see how this looks. It's already running, so if I go, there's a command line that comes with Openwhisk, and it's called WSK. So I can simply say WSK. If I just hit enter, it'll tell me how to use it. But if I say WSK action list, and -I just means ignore the security stuff, the certificate stuff, since it's running on my laptop, I'm okay with that. So right now it comes back with nothing since I haven't created an action yet. So let's say how I would do that. I've got one file here, it's called hello.js. Let's see what's in that file. So this is what that file looks like. Is that hard to see?
Yeah, maybe I can try to turn off the lights.
I can also open it in my editor. I think this is better.
Yeah.
All right, so this is what the this is what the structure looks like of your function. So the only condition is like when you're developing in different languages, your method or your function has to look a certain way so it knows what to call. So in this case, your function has to be called main. I can have other stuff in here, other methods and functions that main can call. It has to have one main method with params as an argument. And all this is saying is if you find a params call name, use it, otherwise just say hello world. So let's see how to run this. First thing I need to do is create an action. Action create, and it remembers what I typed before, so I'll just use that. So all I'm saying here is create me an action called hello, and use this hello.js file. And the -i again is for don't worry about security, the certificate. So if I hit action here, click enter, it created that action. So now if I go action list, so now I see my hello world action has been deployed to my local Openwhisk container. So now I can say, now I have to invoke it, and this is how you would do it. -i, and -r just means don't just quit, wait for the result to come back. Okay, it's interesting. I did not give it a param. I was expecting it to just say hello world. Let's see.
I think param's name is not defined.
Right, I mean, I see why it's doing that, because params is there, but there's no name on it, so I see why undefined could be a valid value here. But I expected it to, oops, sorry. So if I were to give it a -p param and I say name AngularDC, right? So it does find the name in params and it gives it back to me. But I'm guessing so it's using the default as, or it's, yeah. I'll have to read through the docs. I feel like this, I understand why it is undefined, but I feel like it should not. What do you guys think? Like, were you expecting undefined there?
No, I should say
What if you do a -p and don't put anything there?
I expect undefined again. Oh, okay, so if you do -p, you have to put something there, right? Because otherwise it's like -i is not a, so I can do this. But if I were to take this out, and if I were to take, yeah, I think I need to report this as an issue on GitHub, because I was not expecting this. Okay, anyways. That's how you create an action and you put it on, or deploy it, so to speak, on Openwhisk. I wanted to show you a couple of other things. Go back. Right, so this is how you would delete an action, which is simply action delete, give it the name, and -i again for security stuff. And then if I go action list -i, right, actions. So the idea here is I created my hello world, and it's a silly little thing, could be something else. I put it on, or deployed it on, right now it's localhost, but you deploy it on some cloud, and I don't have to worry about, this scaling it. If let's say now it's just me hitting it, but let's say 1,000 people hit it per whatever, I don't have to worry about that. Or also like, what if this Docker container goes down? Then Openwhisk will take care of creating a new one on the fly for me and run the action, right? So it'll take a little bit longer, but all of that is not my concern anymore, and that's the whole idea. So let me show you. So I just want to give you a quick demo of what the open source Openwhisk part looks like, and then I want to quickly show you also how it looks on IBM Cloud. So actually, yeah, let me show you that first. I may have to sign back in. So yeah, once you create an account on IBM Cloud, you can use all of the services for free forever, but there's a monthly usage on it. So there's a free tier for every service up until you hit that tier, or up until you hit that usage amount, and then it resets every month. So to give you an idea, I'll use the same commands, but in this case, we have built on top of the Openwhisk software the UI, like I said, but then also like monitoring, logging. Let's see. So when you log in, you go to this thing called Openwhisk, and these are what my actions look like. So this is again similar to if I had typed in WSK list or action list, would give me back the same thing. You can organize your actions in packages, which is handy if you're working on different projects, or even within a project you want to segment them out by maybe feature or function. So in that case, it's very handy. So what I've done here is I took I think it's this one here. Right, so I took your very basic Angular app that does nothing, and I tried to put create a service which calls an action. I guess what I should have done was create a component that calls the service, calls the action, but I put everything in the main HTML page. All right, so this is the out-of-box experience, right? This is ng, whatever, create me a new app, and then run it. And then what I did was, let me check that out. And then if you look at the different changes that I've done here, okay, so it's again very simple, and I'm not an Angular expert, so you can teach me this part, but essentially it was simple enough. I took, create a new service, or first well, let me show you what the final thing looks like. So it basically takes the simple app, and then it puts this little, it's empty right now, but then it goes and gets location, or goes and gets the weather for a certain location. Now this is kind of a silly example because I'm hitting the Open Weather API, which I could have hit just from Angular. I don't have to go through from Serverless, but I just wanted to demonstrate the idea that this is how you would do it, and you could be doing other things in your server or in your action, and not just look up weather, right? So let's see how this looks. Essentially, right. So I created this interface for weather, which then I'm using in my HTML final output, which looks like this guy here. So the only change here. So yeah, the stuff on the right is what changes after the changes to the default Angular app. So yeah, all I'm doing here is just outputting to my template whatever came back from my service. And then this is what my service looks like. Again, really, really simple. I didn't do much here. Essentially, I just made it injectable. I injected the HTTP client, and then I made a call to my URL, which is my action. And then I'll show you what the action looks like. But before we go there, right, so in here, in the main app component, I just inject my weather service, my weather interface, and then once it comes back, so this is hard coded, but ideally this would not be, but just for demo purposes, I'm using a city. Also, I wanted to check if it's still, oh, now it's DC. Oh, correct. Let's go here. Yes, I also wanted to check. Yeah, still hazy and smoky. So, never mind. Okay, so what does this function look like then, right? So I'm simply calling this API, which is my action on Openwhisk. So if I go back to my IBM Cloud, I created this function called getWeather. So if I look in there, again, I could have done this the way I did the Hello World, but it's essentially the same. I've put in like 2 default values in my parameters that call out to the OpenWeather map API. I've given it my credentials. And then if I go back down to my code, in this case, in the Hello World case, I wasn't doing this, but you can. This is how you would make your function asynchronous, is by returning a promise. And in this case, again, it's really simple. I'm just doing a request.get. If everything comes back fine, I'm saying resolve with some whatever came back, and then otherwise, if something bad happened, reject it. And this essentially then flows back into my Angular app. And then this is the sort of important part. Again, with Openwhisk, you can get all of this from the CLI. So I've enabled it as a web action. It gives me an sort of open URL to test it out. And then also I can expose it using an API key. So once you have your action or set of actions created, then you can use the API connect part of Openwhisk to bundle it together as an API. So let me show you how that looks. So this guy here, if I refresh it. How many people have looked at IBM Cloud before? So this is all like new. Oh, yeah, when you work for IBM, I would hope you have. All right, so if I were to go to this API endpoint that I've created, go to definition. So this is where I'm saying if you hit /weather/city, call this action. This is my Openwhisk function, and then within there, this is where I can pick any of my actions. And once I've done that, then I can set these different, properties on my API. So I can do like rate limits. I can do or authentication. I can do rate limit is somewhere here as well. Yeah, so limit the API on a per key basis, and I've enabled CORS, of course. So that also comes with Openwhisk. So again, you would have a bunch of actions in your product, and then you could the way I've seen people do it is have like a very high level API management endpoint, and then have a whole bunch of actions within that. So, and then it gives you some logging. Right.
What's your config.ts look like? It's just that.
Which one?
URL in your config.
Yeah, that's all there is.
Here you go.
Yeah, I just wanted to keep it a little bit separate, but I'm sure there are better ways to do it in Angular. Yeah. So let me go back to this. Okay, so that's those. Did that make sense? Like how you would use something like this in the use cases where it's appropriate, but not all is sort of, what do they say? The grass is always greener, sort of thing. So there are some limitations, and you mentioned some before. You're trying it at Capital One. So here are some of them. So. First thing you have to think about is, functions are stateless, so you have to, if you're calling multiple functions, we have something called sequence in Openwhisk. So what you can do is you can sequence your actions one after the other. So when one is called, whatever it returns gets passed on to the next one. But if you don't have that set up already, then you have to think about ways to persist your state, so to speak, between function calls. So that's one thing. The other one is like when you're choosing a cloud provider, or when you're doing serverless, the ability to test locally and then deploy to prod, I feel like it's still, Openwhisk provides a good option, but it's still not sort of state of the art right now. It's a fairly new product. The next thing is like, how do you version your functions? I know we are trying to get away from the whole DevOps thing, but still you need some sort of versioning scheme if you're developing in a team. How do you do that? How do you do testing, right? So unit testing, function testing, whatever integration testing. How do you do that with serverless? Again, right now it's more of a manual process. Like I've tried to hook up something like Travis with this, where I can hook up like GitHub. As soon as I push, do some testing and deploy it. It's very possible, but it's still some manual work. Security API gateway, again, you can write hundreds of functions, and then how do you manage that? Latency is a good one. So it didn't work, or it didn't show up when I tried it this time because I've been running it right before I came here. But if I were to like stop all my containers in Openwhisk and then start it again, first time when you call a function, it's a little bit longer than the subsequent times. And if that's important, then how do you work around that? And then dependencies is an interesting one. So how do I bundle up functions and pass them? It's almost like dependency injection with functions. Not possible right now.
Do you know the time between warm and cold? Like,
when I tried it before, it was substantial. Like the warm was instantaneous almost. Most of these things are
no,
again,
like from when it's warm, and then when is it considered cold? Like when?
That's also out of your hands. So depending on how often you run it, depending on what region you're running it from, all of that, because they would reuse your service. That like whoever the cloud provider is would reuse your services. Mostly they pause it if they see a certain pattern that you've been running. They'll pause the container instead of completely removing it. Because remember, all of your actions are stored in the NoSQL database. So, and that's why storing your state is important, because they'll start from scratch not every time, but if they do kill it, they'll start from scratch. But just between cold and warm, it was just the hello world I was trying before was a couple of milliseconds. So I can imagine if it's doing something bigger, it could be longer. Oh yeah, so this is from the Openwhisk website. So in this case, again, some of the limitations. The top two are the biggest one, I think, as developers, when you think about this. The first one is how long will it wait before it times out if nothing is returned, and the other one, of course, is memory. Now you can. So this one's saying like 256. So 256 MB for each action, which may be okay for what you're doing, right? If you're for example, if your use case is when somebody signs up on your site, you want certain things to happen, right? That's a really good example or thing to put into as a separate entity, as a function in Openwhisk, and not worry about it, because that's not very memory intensive. But I've seen people do like ETL stuff, right? So certain file is uploaded to a database, and they run a function to do aggregations or summarize stuff or whatever they need to do, clean up data. And that may require, based on what you're doing, so I've seen people use like pandas or something on Python, and that may require more memory than this. Again, this is what comes with Openwhisk out of the box. So I know with IBM V2, you're able to change this to, I think, 512, or maybe a little bit more than that. So again, depends on the provider. Then other ones also, it's interesting. So so your container is not allowed to write more than n MB log to std out, and this 10 MB is that's a lot of logs. But still, something to keep in mind that you may run into limits. Because again, you're not controlling it. These are, you can play with these a little bit, but there's always an upper limit. Okay. Yes, please.
What's IBM's solution for longer, heavier loads?
For longer and heavier loads? So you can step back in that progression I showed you. Mm-hmm. You can have your own Docker images or your own VM images.
So you're stepping outside of the Whisk, Openwhisk thing?
You could, for your specialized use case, if you need more than what IBM's provided, you would walk back a little bit. But I've seen, like, for most part, like the typical use cases of functions, this is normally enough. Yeah, so I'll provide these slides to you later, but these are some really good resources on serverless, and they're not IBM related at all. So these are champions in this space from different companies who have pulled together a lot of different resources. The one which is from IBM that I do want to point out is something called patterns. And let me quickly show you how this looks. And code patterns are sort of IBM's give back to the developer community. And essentially what it is a set of artifacts like code, a demo video, some sort of pattern. So you can go into different technologies and look at what's provided here. So if I were to go into serverless, and that's what we're talking about here. Right, so these are the different use cases you may have of using a serverless platform. Now, of course, these guys use Openwhisk and all of these, but it's a really good learning resource if you want to learn more about different technologies. So if I go in here, so this is building a function to do image recognition. And this is, so what's happening here, user comes into the application, uploads an image, that goes into the Cloudant database, which is CouchDB. And that triggers an action, which is hooked. So the action and trigger, again, are hooked using a rule. So every time an image is uploaded, an action is run. The action is calling, again, forget the Watson part, it's calling some visual recognition engine, which returns the result back and goes back into your application, right? So this is like, it's doing one-off thing, it's doing that one focused thing, it's identifying or detecting objects and images, and that's all it does. So again, very good use case for a function. And then it gives you steps on how to install it, and all of the source code, right? So if you want to play around with Openwhisk, this is a good way to do it. And this happens to be an Electron app, but all of these applications are used different frameworks. But this is JavaScript related. So yeah, I gave it this picture, it came back with different tags. This was a fun slide. If you know of, let it come up. Yeah, if you know of Kelsey Hightower, he works at Google, I believe, and he's a big serverless guy. But he created this, and this is like this is joke, not serious. Future of serverless, and I found this repo. It's called No Code repo, and essentially it's like no code is the best way to write secure and reliable applications. Write nothing, deploy nowhere. And the fun part was there are 2,000 issues and 300 pull requests with no code. It's amazing. Like, what's going on here? So that is not the future of serverless, but I thought it was funny. All right, so I talked about code patterns. That was all I wanted to show you. Do you have any questions on the Angular app connecting to serverless? I know some people walked in late. Do you want me to show that quickly again? Yes?
So does IBM build their serverless stuff on Docker containers?
They built it on Openwhisk, which uses, one way to deploy that is on Kubernetes using Docker.
Using Docker. Is there any other way to?
There are a couple. So if you go to the, let me bring the, actually that's a good point. If I want to show you the documentation for Openwhisk. So yeah, these are the different packages that go into Openwhisk. So for us, like one of the big ones would be the runtimes, and these are the different runtimes. So if you saw in when I said Docker PS, list out all the containers that are running right now, it had 2 Node.js ones, right? But these are the other ones that come through.
So like that Python one, third down, that's what you would run if your application is running Python?
Yeah, you would not care about that, right? So you would say, here's a .py file. Hey, Openwhisk, invoke it. Or
but that's what I'm saying, so like my py file.
Yeah, exactly.
Run it through, okay.
But it would use the right container. It knows which one to use, right? So you don't have to tell it that.
How about it has third-party library include there?
That's a good question. So if I'm doing a Node.js and if I have if I have some npm package which is not provided on the Docker container, in that case, I can zip it up. So I can say, here's my complete folder with everything in it. I've already done, the package.json has all the requirements. Then it'll take that and it'll install everything on, on Docker before it when it creates the action, it'll make sure everything's deployed, or everything's.
Will it be part of code, or it will be deployed in the Docker, and then the code will be just the code which will run?
That's a good question. Actually, I'm not sure of that, but I can find out and get back to you. So you're asking where the zip file is stored.
Right.
Can you configure these cloud functions? So can you attach a configuration file with some settings that are passwords and secrets that you can later update without touching the function?
Yeah, so there's a Whisk, like we did Whisk list, action list, there's a Whisk action update, and you can have a manifest file.
Mm-hmm.
So that has some of the properties that you're talking about, including, more than that, it also has like, or which files to upload, right? So if it has a manifest file, it'll read that first, and then based on what's in there, it'll update the right action with the right file.
Mm-hmm. And is there a way to protect that manifest file so that it can't be hacked, for example? Or not that it can't be hacked, but somehow obscure it?
Or encrypted.
Yeah, encrypted, that's a good word.
So so the manifest file is sitting on your laptop though, right? So you're saying use this manifest file to upload whatever you need to upload.
Oh,
that's what I meant. Like,
no,
so
I meant like have a configuration file live alongside of your server function.
And what would that have?
It will have like settings. So let's say you're using your serverless function as a proxy to go somewhere else, and you don't want to have the client store sensitive information. So your client will talk to your serverless function, which would read your passwords and go talk to another service with those passwords.
Yeah,
You
so
want to be able to change those passwords once in a while, right?
right. So how I would do that is actually just update the action itself. So, like for example, you have some credentials. Like I had the credentials sitting in my Angular app, the .ts file. So if you have like .ini or whatever .json file, you would process that as part of your action when you upload it. So when you change that next time, you would just say Whisk update action, or Whisk action update, and give it the new set of files, which would have your new config file. There is not a way to, I understand what you're asking. One way to do that would be to make that configuration as part of your action folder, right?
You're kind of deploying just the configuration file in this case, right? You're deploying a new version, but if you change just the key or the secret, you're just deploying a new version, but with the new configuration.
With the new configuration file, correct? Yeah, but it's part of your action.
So then part of your action, you have to have some kind of decryption mechanism live there. There's nothing that lives that IBM provides
So
that does that for you.
So there's also, remember, there's also the, one way to store that would be in here.
Mm-hmm.
So like I've given it some default parameters, and this is part of my action. So one way is to do it this way.
There you go, yeah.
The other way would be to put it inside my action.
Okay, yeah. Cool.
Is there a place where you will define the rules, the user will define the rules?
Yeah, so I didn't do any of that. So essentially, because I don't have any trigger. So rules are only come into play when you're connecting your action to your trigger. So a trigger is something let's look at it quickly. So in this one, I'm getting weather, right? So it doesn't make sense to do a trigger, but let's say, just for demo purposes, right? So these are the different triggers that come with Openwhisk. Now again, I'm on IBM Cloud and it's giving me a nice UI, but the same things can be done using the CLI. So there's a package, system package that has built-in triggers that you can use or you can install into Openwhisk without IBM, right? So in this case here, I can say, run this periodically, right? And I can give it like a cron job expression, or I can set it up here. But if I go back, the other ones were maybe more interesting, right? So or doc changed. So I want to say whenever something changes in my NoSQL database. So here is where I can create a connector to my NoSQL database and give it a database name. And then every time something changes in the database, this trigger will be triggered. And then I'll have a rule that says whenever this trigger is triggered, call this action.
So is there particular standard of rule? First of all, the rule is built in the Openwhisk,
Mhm.
the engine for rule.
Yes.
And can you provide some BPMN type of thing there,
Provide what?
like for business process, like it's BPMN, but for rule, I think there is another standard, right? So how do you provide the rules? Like I want to.
Oh, I see what you mean. So with command line, if rule is just linking a trigger with an action, so there's nothing special in there, right? So all you have to do is whisk, just like whisk action create, you would do a whisk rule create, whisk trigger. So if I go back here, right? So I don't have any triggers right now, but it's essentially this is how I would do it. Right, so create a new trigger. Then I already have my action, and then I would be able to, I deleted it, but I would be able to link my trigger with an action, but it's all CLI based. And then, again, like the UI is provided by IBM Cloud on top of that CLI.
Right, so that means it's a kind of flat rule like this.
Right, correct. And the reason to decouple is you can have multiple action, or the same trigger multiple actions. But if you want them in a certain sequence, then you would build a sequence, which again, Openwhisk provides you an ability to do that. But I believe right here, I can create a sequence, and this will let me put, it'll let me choose my different actions. And then I can call this sequence so that every action is called. I've seen it, people use it on Slack chatbots. So if they want certain number of things to happen once you trigger the bot. I've seen people do it that way. Excuse me. So in the GUI itself, if I weren't doing, the UI is nice to kind of show you the concepts, but it's way more productive to do it this way, obviously. But if I were to do it here, it's really simple. I'll give it a name, give it a package, or create a new one, and then it just lets me choose what language I want my action to be in, which is the other cool part, because you guys are obviously JavaScript people with Angular work that you're doing. Sorry? TypeScript. Sorry. Yes, TypeScript, JavaScript people, native script. But then you may have other people in your team who do Python or Swift or whatever more, and so that's the other advantage it has is you can hook. It doesn't care what these things are written in.
So the whole cloud platform is basically a GUI to get around actually typing through the command line.
That's IBM is providing that on top of Openwhisk.
Right. So like what you're doing.
Well, there's more to IBM Cloud than just Openwhisk,
but like specifically this page, like you're creating an actual
exactly.
action,
I could do all of these things.
Create action.
Exactly.
Minus I, whatever. Okay.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Right.
And then it provides like a screen to look at your logs, and a screen to monitor your actions.
It's just the GUI on top that's
right.
reading over the actual code files.
Exactly. So it's yeah. So and again, that's how I started was Openwhisk is open source. And,
right.
Absolutely look at that. It's just easier to demo it using the GUI sometimes. All right. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah. IBM's offering, I imagine there's some kind of a price for that, right?
Yeah, so if you look at, that's a good question. So all of our services have a free tier. And then they charge, like I was saying, they'll charge if you reach a certain usage. So if I go to compute and I go down to functions, there is a pricing. So this is what it looks like, and then there's a calculator which will let you calculate based on your use case. Right, gives you an idea of how much it'll cost. But yeah, but you could take that Openwhisk thing and deploy it anywhere, right? This is what we're running on top of Openwhisk as well. So it's completely open source.
Deploy it on a server that you own, then if you want to.
The whole idea is to get away from all of that, right? So it's easier to use just something like IBM or Amazon or Google or Microsoft and focus on your function.
Is it possible if you were to build your application through the GUI on IBM Cloud or any of these cloud platforms to then download and compile the whole thing? Is that an option? Probably not.
Download and compile the whole
So
thing.
like for instance, like you're creating an action through the GUI. Does that write an actual script file?
No,
That's what I thought.
no, it does not.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
But you should be able to access IBM's
Yes.
cloud through the CLI.
Correct.
In which case you can probably get to your function through the CLI.
You can get to it, but I think what he's asking is, is there like a thing where it
So like
says
if you were to create,
download all of my actions in my
Right.
package in
No
a
way to do that.
file format? Not that I'm aware of. Let me see. It's easy enough to check. Well, let's create that one again. I want to see what this does.
Action.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't let you like download the code itself, and I'll double check on that for you, but I don't believe that's possible.
okay.
You can look at like last activations. You can look at how many times it was activated. This is giving me sort of metadata about the action. So how most people do it is actually do it on the laptop or do it locally,
Right.
not laptop, do it locally,
Oh.
and then push it out.
I mean, command line's always the best way. But I'm just looking for a shortcut
Yeah.
that I don't think exists.
If I find off one, I'll put it on the comments on the meetup page.
Sure, thanks.
But yeah, I don't
you're
believe
saying
there's.
if you lost your source code one day, you want to just download it.
It's more just the way, the actions. I'm a GUI. I love GUI, right? And I know command line is the easiest. You can't go wrong with the command line and actual script files. But if there was a way to do it through the GUI, because I've got a lot of actions and like one of my py files doesn't run unless a variable has been set, right? But it would be nice. It'd be cool to have a GUI that actually did that.
Right.
And you could download that action, code.
Right. The other thing is like on the GUI, it's really nice and it works well. But then also when I do it, I miss the I miss my editor. Like I can write code here, but it's not the same, right? So all the debugging and there is a way to debug your remote action locally, but I just missed that whole experience of being able to debug and run my code locally before I push it to production.
Right.
So I would, if in a production app, I would do it locally, have version control in GitHub, and then use something like Travis to do all of my pushing to Openwhisk.
What language are you best proficient in?
Ooh.
Or what three?
But that's the thing with serverless. I feel like you have to know a little bit of all of them to be able to demo this to different people. Anyways, any other questions?
I saw that 500 millisecond was the execution time for free here. Is it within a month or?
No, it should not be within a month. Oh, I see what the chart, the table I was showing you. No, that's for each action. It should, and that's the default that Openwhisk provides. So IBM actually lets you move that up.
See, I was paying attention.
Yeah, thank you. All right, I will stop the recording then.
All right, let's give Upkar a round of applause.
Thank you.